It's very simple. You see, because ozone is considered to be pollution. Oh, this is so hilarious. I'm telling you, folks. I can't help but laugh at all the sheeple out there that are just so stupid they'll believe anything that anybody tells them. It blows my mind. I can't comprehend how people can be so, the word is not ignorant, folks. The word is really stupid, mentally crippled, stupid. And this is just one example. You're going to hear a lot of examples on this show. And if you don't like that word stupid, you better change your dial right now because you're going to hear it a lot. You got to wake up. And if you can't look at yourself and admit that you've been stupid, you're never going to wake up and you're never going to solve the problem. That's what I had to do. I had to look in the mirror, look right in my own eyes and say, Bill, you've been stupid for most of your life and you've got to change that now. You see, if I hadn't admitted to myself that I've been stupid most of my life, I would have never changed anything and I wouldn't be doing this tonight. So, why do we only find these so-called holes over the poles and not over New York, Tokyo, Paris, Los Angeles, or Stockholm? Is it because the few personnel stationed at the weather and research facilities at Antarctica use too much hairspray? Why is it that I am able to predict the exact locations and months that the so-called holes will appear and disappear over the Arctic and Antarctic? Because the whole thing is a hoax, folks, designed to make idiots who cannot think for themselves scream for total control of everything and thus help to usher in the one-world totalitarian socialist government. Let us take a real hard look at chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. For according to the doomsday prophets, chlorofluorocarbon molecules are going to rise to the stratosphere, where ultraviolet radiation will break them up, releasing chlorine molecules which will act like a hungry cookie monster and eat all the ozone molecules. This, of course, will cause an ozone hole and everyone will get skin cancer, right? Wrong. Totally wrong. Now, let's look at what they don't tell you. According to measurements, only 1% of CFCs actually break up in the stratosphere, so that 7,500 tons of chlorine, remember that number, 7,500 tons of chlorine, are being released into the stratosphere every year. That's for the whole atmosphere in a year's time. That's the total destructive force of chlorofluorocarbons. 7,500 tons of chlorine. The amount of chlorine spewed into the atmosphere from natural sources makes that measly 7,500 tons look like a drop in the ocean. The atmosphere, folks, absorbs 5 million tons of chlorine from ocean biota, algae, plankton, etc., 84 million tons from biomass burning, 36 million tons from volcanoes, and 600 million tons from seawater. This does not include a volcano like Mount Pinatubo, which loaded at least 20 million tons of chlorine into the atmosphere, of which a very significant portion went into the stratosphere. Mount Erebus in Antarctica, which erupts every day, emits 20 times more chlorine into the atmosphere than the entire amount of chlorine allegedly produced from the breakdown of CFCs. Mount Erebus is about 6 miles upwind from McMurdo Sound, the station from which chlorine measurements are taken. The readings are then used to claim that CFCs, not natural chlorine sources, cause the depletion of the ozone layer. It really does not matter, as ozone is not layered in the atmosphere, and it is not what shields us from those nasty, nasty little ultraviolet rays. No, it's the oxygen. The case is exactly the same with halogens. The doomsayers want all halogen fire extinguishers banned because they produce bromine. This chemical is supposed to be a super ozone destroyer. In fact, 10 times more dangerous than CFCs. Well, then why don't the fire departments of cities like Los Angeles and other large cities who are trying to deplete the atmosphere use only halogen fire extinguishers to put out fires? The actual amount of bromine released is very insignificant, perhaps not even measurable, because most of the bromine that's actually in halogen is destroyed in a chemical reaction during fire suppression. That's why. On top of that, they never have a life long enough in the atmosphere that's necessary to even get up to the stratosphere. Ozone levels over a measured period of time shows a clear oscillation from year to year. If you compare the cycle in ozone levels with the number of sunspots over the same period, the correlation is clear. An 11-year and a 22-year cycle is in ozone levels matching the sunspot cycle are clearly evident. A major influence on the density of ozone in the atmosphere is sunspots, solar flares, in other words, the influence of the sun. It is how ozone is created in the first place. Billions of ions of ozone are created every instant and are destroyed every instant. In 1988, the Ozone Trends panel, the people that you've all been listening to like a bunch of idiots, without verifying anything, without demanding any scientific papers to back it up, without question. In 1988, this Ozone Trends panel released a report supposedly documenting that there had been a 3% depletion of the ozone layer over the northern hemisphere. They gave a press conference. They handed out a summary of the report. But the report itself did not come out for another 3 years. Did you hear that, folks? The report itself did not come out for another 3 years. And when it did came out, what it said was actually different from what they reported at the press conference. But it scared you all, scared everybody, and it got everything into motion that was necessary to ban CFCs without any scientific evidence, no scientific papers, no real scientific factual correlation. Without even issuing a report for 3 years, it got everybody going to ban CFCs. Then they gave a whole sequence of conferences after that with the same modus operandi. They gave a press conference in April 1991 that claimed 8% ozone depletion. No scientific paper to follow it up. No peer review of the data. And then last October they gave another press conference where they claimed something very similar, but again with no report, nothing published in the scientific literature. And the great herds of sheeple mobilized to save the ozone layer and ban CFCs. The wolf is at the door, folks, and since most of you are sheep, you're going to be eaten. That's what wolves do to sheep, especially foolish, stupid sheep. In their 1988 press conference, the Ozone Trends panel picked a very curious date, 1969, to start their analysis of worldwide ozone data. And they ended in 1985. 17 years are 1.5 solar cycles later. Remember what we said about the solar cycles, 11 and 22-year cycles? If you draw a straight line from 1969 to 1985, you get the ozone depletion that they claim. But if they had used a 22-year period between 1962 and 1985, there's hardly any change at all. It's entirely a decision of what date they picked to begin their measurements, one of the most critical features of how they've been manipulating public opinion. Well, while you think about those facts and figures, we're going to take a short break, folks. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Now, that didn't take too long, did it? Another way the Ozone Trends panel manipulated their data to scare the public involves the enormous variability in the ozone in the atmosphere from day to day, month to month, and at different times of the year. So you didn't know that, did you? Changes from day to day. The density of the ozone in the atmosphere over the northern hemisphere in March, folks, is much greater than in October of the same year. A 40% difference, in fact, and it happens every year according to the natural cycles previously described. The panel started measuring in the time of year when the ozone is densest and stopped in the part of the year when it is the least dense. And they knew exactly what they were doing. Again, these groups are manipulating the data intentionally to scare the public into believing there is a danger which does not actually exist. Aren't you all scared? The sky is falling. That was Vice President-elect Al Gore with the #1 environmental hit, Scare You. Oh, yes. Yes. You're all supposed to be scared to death. Because there's holes in the ozone layer. The CFCs are gobbling the rest of them up like little Pac-Mans running through the sky. They also claim a drop-off in CFC concentrations going from 100 to 5 parts per trillion in just the first 2 or 3 kilometers upon entering the stratosphere. The ozone depletion proponents say the concentrations get lower because ultraviolet radiation is breaking up the CFC molecules, and the stratosphere is the only place where there are intense enough amounts of ultraviolet radiation to break down the CFC molecules. What a crock. The stratosphere starts around 25 kilometers above the Earth's surface, and very small amounts of ultraviolet radiation in the range necessary to break down CFC molecules get within 30 kilometers, folks. In order to find the significant concentrations of ultraviolet radiation that can break up CFC molecules, you've got to get above 40 kilometers. CFC molecules just don't make it up that high. They're heavy molecules. So it can't be ultraviolet radiation that's getting rid of the CFCs, which is then supposed to be releasing chlorine, which is then supposed to be destroying the imaginary ozone layer. Sorry, folks, it just ain't happening. It's not going on. You've been hoodwinked. The favorite Freemason term. You've been hoodwinked. Hoaxed, lied to, scammed. But you know what? If you weren't stupid, it could never have happened. When I use that word stupid, I'm not talking to those of you who do use your head, who can think, who are searching for the truth, and who do verify before believing. Nope, I'm talking to the stupid idiot that's sitting next to you. Another thing they conveniently omit is that the stratosphere is an inversion layer, which means that instead of getting colder with altitude, it gets warmer. And when you have warm air on top of cold air, the cold air is like a plug. It's why Los Angeles has a smog problem. The air cannot rise above the valley because of the inversion layer. The air remains trapped. Whatever air makes it to the upper part of the atmosphere comes right back down because of this plug. There is no evidence that they are being broken up. The big threat touted by the doomsayers is increased skin cancer, a blatant, and I mean blatant lie. The only reason skin cancer has risen is that the old taboos against being in the sun and suntanning have fallen by the wayside. It wasn't too long ago when it was not cool to be out in the sun. It was not cool to have a suntan. And women were taught never, under any circumstances, let the sun touch your skin. In many, many cultures and many nations of the world, that was the rule. Right or wrong, that was the rule. The population of the world also has doubled just since 1957. And there are more people out in the sun and on beaches than ever in the history of the world. More light-skinned people have moved south or north, as the case may be, in order to enjoy milder winters. If a person living in the northern hemisphere moves south only 60 to 120 miles, it translates into an increase of 10 to 20% in ultraviolet radiation exposure. Didn't know that, did you? If you were to move from Tromsø, Norway to Panama or Bombay, you're talking about an increase in ultraviolet radiation of more than 600%. According to the theory of those who want to scare you into the New World Order, for that is the only answer to this were it real, a 1% ozone depletion means a 2% increase in ultraviolet radiation, but the data shows ultraviolet radiation actually decreased as much as 7% between 1974 and 1975, when these measurements were taken in the United States. When this study was released in Science magazine by Joseph Scotto of the National Cancer Institute, the only network in the world systematically measuring ultraviolet radiation